Ambassador Margaret Thompson adjusted her simple black notebook and settled into the uncomfortable metal chair in the far corner of the massive negotiation room. The chair creaked slightly under her weight, a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the cathedral-sized chamber of the Galactic Council. Around her, representatives from 12 different alien species filled the air with a mixture of electronic beeps, guttural growls, and melodic chimes that served as their various languages. She looked unremarkable sitting there. Her brown hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and she wore the standard gray diplomatic uniform that marked her as a junior human representative. Most of the alien delegates had stopped noticing her weeks ago. To them, she was just another note-taking human, quietly scribbling in her notebook while the real negotiations happened between the important species. 3,000 light-years away, Commander Robert Hayes sat in his sterile office aboard the Draconian Empire's flagship, staring at a stack of intelligence reports that made his stomach turn cold. The reports were thin, printed on the Empire's finest military paper, but their contents represented a puzzle that had kept him awake for months. "Captain Williams," he called to his intelligence officer. David Williams entered immediately, his boots clicking sharply on the metal floor. "Yes, Commander?" Hayes spread the reports across his desk like a card dealer showing a winning hand. "Look at these negotiation outcomes from the past 5 years. The Terran Mining Rights Agreement, the Human Colonial Expansion Treaty, the Interspecies Trade Standardization Pact." Williams leaned forward, studying the documents. Each one showed the same pattern. Humans had entered negotiations as a minor species with limited bargaining power. They had left with agreements that gave them advantages no one expected. "What am I looking for, sir?" Williams asked. "The common factor," Hayes replied, pointing to a small detail in each report. Every single negotiation that ended favorably for humans had the same junior diplomat present. A woman named Margaret Thompson. Williams frowned. "That could be coincidence, Commander. Junior diplomats often attend multiple sessions." Hayes pulled out another stack of papers. "These are the negotiations where humans got standard or unfavorable terms. Guess who wasn't present?" The pattern was clear. When Margaret Thompson attended negotiations, humans won. When she didn't, they lost or barely managed equal terms. Back in the negotiation chamber, Margaret made a small mark in her notebook as the Crystalline Coalition's representative, a being that looked like a walking diamond, expressed frustration about shipping routes through draconian space. The creature's voice sounded like wind chimes in a storm. "The routes you propose cut through our sacred meditation zones," the crystalline delegate said through a translation device. "This is unacceptable to our people." The draconian representative, a massive reptilian creature with scales that shifted color based on mood, hissed his response. "Your meditation zones were not registered with the Galactic Navigation Authority. We cannot be expected to avoid unmarked territories." Margaret continued writing, but she also listened to the smaller conversations happening around the room. The vapor entities, beings that looked like controlled clouds, were whispering among themselves about energy costs. The Machine Collective's representative was calculating something on its internal processors, creating a soft humming sound. She heard the aquatic species delegate mention to an aide that their homeworld was entering its breeding season, which meant increased protein needs for their population. The insectoid representative was tapping nervously, a behavior Margaret had learned indicated hunger in their species. Hayes studied security footage from the negotiation chamber, watching Margaret's seemingly innocent actions with growing unease. When she shifted in her chair, conversation somehow changed direction. When she made quiet observations, entire discussions pivoted toward new possibilities. "Captain Williams, watch this segment," Hayes said, pointing to his screen. "Thompson mentions that the crystalline species might benefit from the mineral deposits found near draconian meditation retreat worlds." On the screen, Margaret had indeed made this casual comment during a break in formal negotiations. Within an hour, the crystalline and draconian delegates were discussing a potential arrangement where meditation retreats could be established near mining operations, creating a win-win situation that neither species had previously considered. "She plants seeds," Williams observed. "She doesn't push or demand. She just mentions possibilities and lets others think they came up with the ideas." Hayes nodded grimly. "And somehow, these possibilities always benefit human interests." In the current negotiation, Margaret noticed that the tension between the Crystalline Coalition and the Draconian Empire was preventing any progress on the shipping route issue. Both species were locked in a cultural misunderstanding that went deeper than territory rights. She raised her hand slightly, a gesture so small that most delegates missed it. "Excuse me," she said in her quiet voice. I hope you don't mind a question from someone still learning about interspecies customs. The room grew quieter. Margaret's questions were known to be thoughtful, if infrequent. Ambassador, in crystalline culture, are meditation zones considered sacred because of their energy properties, or because of their historical significance? The crystalline delegate's faceted surface caught the light as he turned toward her. Both, actually. The zones contain natural energy formations that have been used by our people for thousands of years. Margaret nodded and made a note. And Commander Vex, she addressed the Draconian representative, your people value efficiency in space travel above most other considerations, correct? The reptilian creature's scales shifted to a lighter shade, indicating curiosity. This is true. Long routes cost resources and time. I was just wondering, Margaret continued, her voice remaining conversational, whether energy-rich zones might actually enhance navigation efficiency for certain types of engines. The room fell silent as both delegates processed this possibility. Hayes, watching from his distant flagship, felt a chill run down his spine as he realized what was happening. Margaret hadn't proposed a solution. She had simply asked questions that led others to discover solutions themselves. Within minutes, technical experts from both species were discussing whether crystalline meditation zones could serve as navigation beacons for draconian ships, creating shorter routes while actually enhancing the sacred energy properties both species valued. Hayes closed the intelligence reports and looked at Williams. Captain, I think we have a problem. The humans haven't developed new technology or discovered telepathic abilities. They've done something worse. They've learned how to listen. Commander Hayes walked through the corridors of his flagship with heavy steps. The metal floors echoed with each footfall as he made his way to the intelligence briefing room. 3 weeks had passed since he first noticed the pattern around Margaret Thompson, and now he needed answers. Lieutenant Sarah Davis stood at attention when he entered. She was one of his best surveillance specialists, trained to notice details that others missed. Next to her was Agent Michael Brown, a man who had spent years studying alien behavior patterns for the Empire. What did you find? Hayes asked without ceremony. Davis activated a holographic display that showed footage from the negotiation chambers. Sir, we monitored Thompson for 18 days straight. We recorded every word she spoke, every gesture she made, every person she interacted with. The hologram showed Margaret sitting in various meeting rooms, always in the same quiet manner. Sometimes she wrote in her notebook. Sometimes she listened. Most of the time she seemed to be doing nothing at all. We scanned for hidden technology, Brown added. No communication devices beyond her standard diplomatic equipment. No neural implants. No genetic modifications. She's completely normal by human standards. Hayes frowned. Then how is she doing it? Davis touched a control, and the hologram zoomed in on Margaret during a break between formal sessions. She was standing near a refreshment area, holding a cup of water and talking quietly with a junior aide from the reptilian delegation. Watch this conversation, Davis said. It seems completely innocent. On the hologram, Margaret was asking the reptilian aide about his family. The young alien mentioned that his sister had just graduated from the Imperial Engineering Academy. Margaret congratulated him and asked a few polite questions about the Academy's programs. Now watch what happens 6 sessions later, Brown said, advancing the recording. The scene shifted to show Margaret in a formal negotiation. She was addressing the insectoid representative, whose species was known for valuing educational achievement above almost everything else. Ambassador, I recently learned about the excellent engineering programs in reptilian space, Margaret said casually. Perhaps there are opportunities for academic exchanges that could benefit both our species. Hayes watched as the insectoid delegate's antennae twitched with interest. Within minutes, the conversation had shifted from territorial disputes to educational partnerships. By the end of that session, the insectoids and reptilians had agreed to a student exchange program that also happened to create favorable trade routes for human cargo ships. She remembers everything, Davis explained. Every casual comment, every personal detail, every cultural preference mentioned in passing. Then she uses that information weeks later to create connections between species. Hayes studied the recordings more carefully. Show me more examples. Brown pulled up another sequence. Here, Thompson overhears an aquatic delegate mention that their homeworld is experiencing algae blooms that are affecting their food supply. She doesn't react at the time, just keeps taking notes. The recording showed Margaret listening quietly as the aquatic representative spoke to a colleague in their native language. Her face showed no particular interest, and she continued writing in her notebook. 3 days later, Brown continued, She's in a different negotiation about waste management systems. Watch what she does. The scene changed to show Margaret addressing the Machine Collective's representative. I was wondering, she said, whether your people's biorecycling technology might be useful for managing organic waste in aquatic environments. Hayes saw the connection immediately. The Machine Collective needed raw organic material for their recycling processes. The aquatic species needed help managing their algae blooms. Margaret had linked two separate problems into one solution, and human shipping companies would transport the organic waste, creating profit for all three species. She's mapping relationships, Davis said. While other diplomats focus on their own goals, Thompson tracks every need, every resource, every cultural pressure point across dozens of species. Hayes walked to the viewport and stared out at the stars. How does she process all this information? Humans don't have enhanced memory capabilities. Brown pulled out a tablet and showed Hayes pages of analysis. We studied her note-taking system. She uses a simple but effective method. Each species gets a section in her notebook. She records not just official positions but personal details, cultural events, resource needs and relationship patterns. The tablet showed reconstructed pages from Margaret's notebook. Her handwriting was neat and organized. She had sections labeled with species names, and under each section were detailed observations about everything from religious festivals to family structures to economic pressures. Look at this entry, Brown pointed to a specific page. She noted that crystalline beings increase their energy consumption during their mating season, which happens every 18 months. She also recorded that the vapor entities produce excess energy during their reproduction cycle, which occurs every 2 years. Hayes read the notes and felt a chill. She's calculating when species will need resources and when they'll have surpluses. Exactly, Davis confirmed. She doesn't just understand individual species. She understands the entire ecosystem of galactic politics as interconnected cycles and relationships. Brown showed another recording where Margaret was listening to a heated argument between two alien species about mining rights. While the other diplomats tried to mediate the argument directly, Margaret was quietly asking a third species about their manufacturing needs. She identified that the argument was really about economic security, Brown explained. The two species were fighting over mining rights because they both needed specific materials. Thompson found a third species that could provide those materials through existing trade relationships, making the mining dispute unnecessary. Hayes turned back to his officers. So she's not manipulating anyone. She's not using force or deception. No, sir, Davis replied. She's making everyone else better at finding solutions. She helps species see connections they missed and opportunities they didn't know existed. Brown nodded in agreement. The scary part is that she genuinely seems to want everyone to benefit. It's not zero-sum thinking. She finds ways for multiple species to win simultaneously, and humans profit because they facilitate these win-win arrangements. Hayes looked at the intelligence reports spread across the table. Margaret Thompson wasn't using advanced technology or secret powers. She was simply paying attention to everything around her and helping others make better decisions. Somehow, this made her more dangerous than any weapon the Empire had ever faced. Keep monitoring her, Hayes ordered. I need to understand if this is a skill that other humans can learn, or if Thompson is unique. Hayes paced in his command center, studying the star charts spread across the central table. 3 weeks of surveillance had taught him everything about Margaret Thompson's methods, but he still didn't know her limits. Today he would find out. Agent Johnson, he called to his tactical officer. Thomas Johnson approached with a data pad containing the most complex diplomatic scenario the Empire had ever designed. Sir, the setup is complete. 7 species, each with directly conflicting interests that cannot be mathematically resolved. We've run computer simulations with our best diplomatic algorithms. Every possible outcome leads to deadlock or war. Hayes examined the scenario details. The Crystalline Coalition needed exclusive mining rights to asteroid fields that the Machine Collective required for manufacturing. The vapor entities claimed the same space as sacred ancestral territory. The Aquatic Federation demanded shipping routes through areas that 3 other species considered too dangerous to allow passage. The beauty of it, Johnson continued, is that each species has valid reasons for their positions. There's no obvious compromise, no hidden middle ground. Even human intuition should fail against pure mathematics. Hayes nodded with satisfaction. And Thompson doesn't know this is a test? No, sir. As far as the human delegation knows, this is a genuine dispute that erupted naturally between client species. They've been asked to mediate as neutral parties. The negotiation chamber had been specially prepared for this test. Hidden cameras captured every angle and sophisticated listening devices recorded even the quietest whispers. Hayes wanted to document exactly how Margaret Thompson would attempt to solve the impossible. Margaret entered the chamber carrying her usual notebook and wearing her standard gray diplomatic uniform. She looked tired, as if she had spent the night reading briefing materials. Her human colleague, Ambassador Lisa Parker, accompanied her but took a seat near the back of the room. The 7 alien representatives filled the chamber with tension. The crystalline delegate's faceted surface caught the light harshly, reflecting his agitation. The machine collective's representative hummed with processing activity, calculating and recalculating possible outcomes. The vapor entity floated restlessly near the ceiling, its cloud-like form shifting between colors. "Thank you all for agreeing to mediation," Margaret said quietly as she took her seat. "I understand this situation has been developing for several months." The crystalline representative spoke first, his voice like breaking glass. "The asteroid fields in question contain rare elements essential to our planetary infrastructure. Without access to these materials, our cities will begin failing within 2 standard years." Hayes watched from his command center as Margaret made careful notes. She didn't react to the urgency in the crystalline delegate's voice or offer immediate solutions. The machine collective's representative responded with mechanical precision. "Our manufacturing requirements for these same materials exceed crystalline needs by a factor of 3.7. Logic dictates that efficiency should determine allocation." Logic. The vapor entity's form shifted to an angry red color. "Those asteroids exist in the sacred migration path of our ancestors. Your so-called logic shows no respect for spiritual significance that predates your civilizations by millennia." Margaret continued writing, but Hayes noticed she was also listening to conversations around the edges of the room. A junior aide from the Aquatic Federation was explaining to his supervisor that their species' breeding season was approaching, which would require increased protein shipments through the disputed space routes. For 3 days, the negotiations proceeded exactly as Hayes had predicted. Each species presented their position, backed by solid reasoning and genuine need. Computer models showed no possible compromise. The mathematical impossibility remained unchanged. Margaret said very little during these first 3 days. She asked occasional questions for clarification, but mostly she listened and took notes. Other diplomats began showing signs of frustration. Some alien representatives started making subtle threats about withdrawing from broader alliance agreements. On the 4th day, Margaret's approach changed. She began asking questions that seemed completely unrelated to the dispute. "Ambassador Chen," she addressed the crystalline representative, "in your culture, what time of year are the most important spiritual ceremonies held?" The crystalline being's surface shifted to a confused pattern. "Our light renewal festivals occur during the 7th and 14th months of our calendar. But I fail to see how this relates to mining rights." Margaret made a note and turned to the machine collective representative. "Commander Anderson, your manufacturing cycles follow predictable patterns based on resource availability, correct?" "Affirmative. Our production increases during cooler periods when our processors operate at optimal efficiency. This occurs during months 4 through 9 of the standard galactic calendar." Hayes leaned forward in his command chair. Margaret was collecting information that had no apparent connection to the territorial dispute. Her questions continued. "Captain Martinez," she spoke to the vapor entity, "when do your people typically conduct their ancestral migrations?" The cloud being's form shifted to a thoughtful purple. "Our migration patterns follow ancient stellar alignments that occur twice per year. The Great Migration happens during the first 3 months, and the return journey during months 10 through 12. Margaret spent the next hour asking similar questions about biological cycles, religious observances, and operational requirements. She learned that the Aquatic Federation's breeding season created predictable shipping patterns. She discovered that 2 of the other species had seasonal needs that created temporary resource surpluses. Hayes watched with growing unease as Margaret began drawing connections that his computer models had missed. She wasn't looking for a single solution to the territorial dispute. She was mapping out how all 7 species' needs and capabilities changed throughout the year. "What if," Margaret said finally, "instead of fighting over permanent exclusive rights, we created a rotating schedule based on each species' natural cycles?" The room fell silent as she explained her proposal. During months 1 through 3, when the vapor entities were conducting their great migration, the asteroid fields could be used for crystalline mining operations. The Machine Collective could access the area during their peak efficiency period, while the Aquatic Federation could use the shipping routes during their non-breeding seasons. Hayes watched his impossible scenario transform into an elegant solution that gave each species what they needed most when they needed it most. Margaret had turned a zero-sum conflict into a system where everyone benefited by working with natural timing instead of against it. The mathematical impossibility had been solved not through superior calculation, but through understanding that the problem itself was based on false assumptions about permanent exclusive control. Hayes realized with cold certainty that Margaret Thompson was more dangerous than he had imagined. Hayes sat in his command chair, watching the impossible happen on his screens. 7 species that should have been at war were now celebrating a breakthrough that transformed their conflict into cooperation. Margaret Thompson was gathering her notes, looking as calm as if she had just solved a simple math problem. Colonel Lewis, Hayes called to his chief analyst. James Lewis had spent 30 years studying alien psychology and behavior patterns for the Empire. If anyone could explain what they had just witnessed, it would be him. Lewis approached with a thick file of research data. His face showed the same confusion that Hayes felt. Sir, I've been analyzing Thompson's methods against everything we know about diplomatic theory and negotiation tactics. And? She's not following any established protocol. What she did should have been impossible. Lewis pulled out a chart showing the complexity of the 7-way dispute. Our computers calculated over 10,000 possible approaches to this scenario. Every single one led to deadlock or partial war. Hayes studied the chart, feeling a growing sense of unease. Then how did she solve it? Lewis activated a display showing human evolutionary history. Sir, I think we need to understand what humans are, not just what they do. Every other species in the galaxy evolved to excel in specific areas. The Crystalline Coalition developed superior mathematical processing. The Machine Collective achieved perfect logical reasoning. The Vapor entities gained advanced energy manipulation. The display showed brain scans and behavioral patterns from different species. Each one showed clear specialization in particular types of thinking. But humans, Lewis continued, evolved as persistence hunters and social animals at the same time. This created a unique combination of abilities that no other species possesses. Hayes leaned forward. Explain that. Persistence hunting requires tracking prey over vast distances and long periods. Hunters must remember terrain, animal behavior patterns, weather conditions, and seasonal changes. They have to think several steps ahead while adapting to constantly changing conditions. The display showed ancient human hunters working together to track large animals across difficult terrain. Hayes began to see the connection. At the same time, Lewis continued, humans lived in complex social groups where survival depended on understanding relationships, managing conflicts, and coordinating group activities. They had to read emotions, predict behavior, and find solutions that kept the group together. Hayes watched footage of Margaret in the negotiation room. She had been tracking the needs, cycles, and relationships of 7 different species the same way ancient humans tracked animal herds across continents. She's not just intelligent, Lewis explained. She combines pattern recognition with social understanding in ways that create exponential advantages. When she looked at the asteroid dispute, she didn't see 7 separate problems. She saw one ecosystem with natural rhythms and relationships. The analysis showed how Margaret had identified connections between spiritual ceremonies, manufacturing cycles, breeding seasons, and resource availability. Other species focused on their individual needs, but she saw the larger patterns that connected everyone. It gets worse, Lewis said, pulling up more data. This isn't just one human with special training. These abilities appear to be part of normal human cognitive development. Thompson isn't exceptional among her species. She's just applying standard human thinking patterns to galactic politics. Hayes felt his stomach drop. You're saying other humans could do this? With proper training and experience, yes. Humans naturally think in terms of complex relationships, long-term patterns, and adaptive solutions. Most species think in straight lines. Humans think in webs. The display showed comparison tests between human diplomats and representatives from other species. When presented with multi-party conflicts, humans consistently found solutions that other species missed, not because they were smarter, but because they processed information differently. Watch this recording from today's session, Lewis said, showing footage of Margaret asking about spiritual ceremonies and manufacturing cycles. Other species heard random questions. But she was building a mental map of how all 7 species' needs fluctuated throughout the year. They saw it clearly now. Margaret hadn't solved the asteroid dispute through superior negotiation skills. She had recognized that the conflict was based on false assumptions about fixed needs and permanent solutions. By understanding each species' natural cycles, she found windows of opportunity that created mutual benefit. The terrifying part, Lewis continued, is that she genuinely wants everyone to succeed. This isn't deception or manipulation. She helped 7 species find a solution that made them all stronger while also advancing human interests. Hayes studied the final agreement from the asteroid negotiations. Human shipping companies would coordinate the rotating schedule, earning fees from all 7 species. Human technological companies would provide the timing systems needed to manage the complex arrangement. Humans would profit enormously, but every other species would also get exactly what they needed. She doesn't win by making others lose, Lewis observed. She wins by making everyone else better at winning. Hayes understood now why the Empire feared Margaret Thompson. It wasn't because she was unbeatable in negotiation. It was because she represented the potential of her entire species. If humans could naturally think in terms of complex ecosystems and long-term relationships, what would happen as they gained more experience in galactic politics? Colonel, run a projection, Hayes ordered. If more humans develop Thompson's level of diplomatic skill, what happens to the balance of galactic power? Lewis worked at his console for several minutes, then displayed the results. The projection showed human influence expanding not through conquest or economic domination, but through becoming indispensable facilitators of interspecies cooperation. They become the species that makes everything work better, Lewis said quietly. Other civilizations would depend on human mediation to solve their problems. Within 50 years, no major galactic decision could be made without human involvement. Hayes stared at the projection, realizing that the Draconian Empire was facing something far more dangerous than a military threat. They were facing a species that could make itself necessary to everyone else's success. Margaret Thompson wasn't just a skilled diplomat. She was a preview of what humanity might become. The species that understood how to help everyone else win, while quietly positioning themselves at the center of galactic civilization. Hayes now understood why the Empire feared the one human who sat in every negotiation room. She wasn't just winning individual agreements. She was reshaping the galaxy itself. Hayes stood alone in his private quarters, staring out at the stars through the reinforced viewport. The intelligence reports from the past month lay scattered across his desk, each one confirming what he had already begun to understand. The galaxy was changing and the Draconian Empire could not stop it through traditional means. A soft chime indicated someone at his door. "Enter," he called. Admiral Susan Clark walked in, followed by Commander Paul Martinez. Both were veteran diplomats who had represented the Empire in dozens of negotiations over their careers. Their expressions showed the same confusion and concern that Hayes felt. "Commander," Clark began, "we need to discuss the situation with the human mediator." Hayes gestured for them to sit. "What happened in today's session?" Martinez activated a small holographic display showing the latest negotiation chamber. "Thompson mediated a dispute between us and 3 of our former client species. The Insectoid Coalition, the Reptilian Alliance, and the Crystalline Federation were all threatening to break their trade agreements with us." Hayes had expected this. The Empire's aggressive expansion policies had created resentment among smaller species who felt bullied into unfavorable arrangements. What was their complaint? "They claimed our shipping fees were too high and our trade requirements too restrictive," Clark explained. "Normally, we would remind them of the military protection we provide and the consequences of breaking established agreements. But Thompson was there," Hayes said, knowing what came next. "Yes," Martinez confirmed. "She asked if she could help find a solution that worked for everyone." The holographic display showed Margaret Thompson sitting in her usual quiet manner, notebook in hand. Around her, representatives from 4 different species argued about contract terms, shipping costs, and trade routes. "Watch what she did," Clark said, advancing the recording. Hayes saw Margaret begin asking her typical questions. She inquired about seasonal shipping patterns, asked about the specific resources each species needed most urgently, and explored the timing of various industrial cycles. She discovered that our shipping rates were highest during periods when these species had the greatest need for transport, Martinez explained. But she also found that our fleet capacity was underutilized during certain months. Hayes watched as Margaret guided the discussion toward a new arrangement. Instead of fixed shipping fees, the Empire could offer lower rates during off-peak periods while the client species could schedule their major shipments to take advantage of these reduced costs. "The result?" Clark asked rhetorically. "Our former clients get lower shipping costs, we maintain steady revenue throughout the year instead of feast or famine cycles, and everyone signs new long-term agreements. Hayes studied the final contract terms displayed on the hologram. The Empire had not lost power or prestige. Instead, they had found a way to maintain their relationships while adapting to economic realities that served everyone better. "She made us better negotiators," Martinez said quietly. "We were so focused on maintaining dominance that we missed opportunities for sustainable profit." Hayes closed his eyes, finally understanding the full scope of the problem they faced. "We can't eliminate her." "No, sir," Clark agreed. "If we remove Thompson from negotiations, other species will assume we fear human influence. That could trigger exactly the kind of anti-Empire coalition we're trying to prevent. And if we try to discredit her methods," Martinez added, "we would be attacking the very process that's making our own agreements more stable and profitable." Hayes opened a secure communication channel to his intelligence network. Within minutes, Agent Michael Brown appeared on the display from his surveillance post. "Brown, what's Thompson's current status?" "Sir, she's preparing for tomorrow's session on colonial territory disputes. The session involves 8 species with competing expansion claims. Standard protocols suggest this will take weeks to resolve, if resolution is possible at all." Hayes knew that Margaret would somehow find connections and compromises that transformed the territorial dispute into collaborative opportunities. She would help species discover shared benefits they had never considered, while creating new roles for human mediation services. "Brown, I need you to arrange a private meeting with Thompson after tomorrow's session." "Sir? Are you sure that's wise?" Hayes looked at his senior officers, seeing his own resignation reflected in their faces. "We need to adapt to the new reality. If we can't defeat her, we need to understand how to work with her." The next evening, Hayes found himself in a small diplomatic meeting room aboard the neutral station that hosted the negotiation sessions. Margaret Thompson entered alone, carrying her worn notebook and looking remarkably calm for someone about to meet with the military leader of the galaxy's most powerful empire. "Commander Hayes," she said simply, taking a seat across from him. "I wondered when you would want to talk directly." Hayes studied her face, looking for signs of deception or hidden agendas. He found none. "How long have you known we were monitoring your activities?" "Since the second week of surveillance," Margaret replied. "Your people are skilled, but they think like hunters tracking prey. I've learned to think like someone building communities." "And you're not concerned about the Empire's attention?" Margaret smiled, a genuinely warm expression. "Should I be? Your people have been watching me help species find better solutions to their problems. I haven't threatened anyone or damaged any existing relationships." Hayes realized she was right. Every negotiation Margaret had influenced had resulted in stronger, more stable agreements. Even the Empire's own arrangements had improved through her involvement. "What do you want?" Hayes asked directly. "The same thing you do," Margaret replied. "A stable galaxy where different species can coexist and prosper. The difference is that I've learned stability comes from cooperation, not dominance." Hayes looked at this unremarkable human woman who had quietly reshaped galactic politics through the simple act of helping others communicate better. He understood now that the Empire faced a choice: adapt to a new reality where success came through collaboration, or watch that reality develop without them. "What happens next?" he asked. Margaret opened her notebook and showed him pages filled with observations about dozens of species, including detailed notes about draconian culture, needs, and concerns. "We figure out how to make everyone stronger," she said. "Including your empire." Hayes realized that Margaret Thompson had been preparing for this conversation for months, gathering the information needed to help even the Draconian Empire find better ways to achieve their goals. She wasn't conquering the galaxy through force or deception. She was quietly becoming indispensable to everyone's success. The Empire didn't fear the one human who sat in every negotiation room because she was unbeatable. They feared her because she was irreplaceable.